We have a new experimental slasher horror film that takes the audience through the woods while following a mass serial killer while wreaking havoc largely from the killer's perspective. Now that sounds like a pretty cool idea, right? Well, the question is, does this cool idea truly execute its premise? Will this end up being one of the best horror slasher films of the year? But more importantly, is this film worth checking out? Well, we'll be discussing that and much more in today's review of In a Violent Nature. But first, let's get the conversation going in the comments below. Let me know if you all have heard of this film and if you were excited to check it out. But more importantly, once you've seen the film, share your thoughts on your experience while watching this from the different POV. Did it work? Did it not work? What were some of your favorite moments, your favorite kill? Were you left disappointed after watching this? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. So yes, this film follows a mute serial killer who is targeting a group of teenagers in the wilderness with the events observed largely from the killer's perspective. So as a lifelong fan of horror movies, but being that the slasher is my favorite subgenre within the horror umbrella, I heard the great words coming out of Sundance about this film. When I read the synopsis, when I officially saw that trailer, I was excited. I was very hooked on the idea and the premise. But I'll be honest, at the same time, when I saw that trailer, I'm like, wait a minute. This looks like a carbon copy of Friday the 13th. We're just pretty much following Jason Voorhees for the most of the film. So is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it worth checking out? Let's get into my thoughts. And I want to start off by saying, number one, this isn't the first horror film to give you the perspective of the serial killer, but it is one of the first ones that gives you like 90% of the serial killer. And that just kind of made me think of, shout out to Scream 4 with the great movie trivia.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, or Psycho?
Psycho!
None of the above. Peeping Tom, 1960, directed by Michael Powell. First movie to ever put the audience in the killer's POV.
So as we break it all down, I want to say this film had a lot of potential, right? There's some good things to be had and some bad things. As I was watching this, while it lacked in certain elements, it made up for certain things at certain points in the film, and it made a little bit of a mixed experience for me. But opening this review with my positives and speaking positively about this film, I gotta say the first thing here, my all-time favorite horror slasher film is 1978's John Carpenter's Halloween, and there's many different reasons why it's my favorite horror film of all time, but one of those reasons is the simplistic approach in which the film unfolds and how it explains the origins and the why behind the shape and why was Michael killing, and I felt this film had a similar sense of simplicity in its approach and going back to the basics with this film. Within the first act of this film, it does a really solid job of establishing the backstory of our killer who went by the name of Johnny, and it sets you on this path of understanding his why, and it doesn't overcomplicate his story with a bunch of nonsense, and I just love when a film just keeps it simple, but also, if I'm being honest, I really kind of enjoyed the backstory and the origins, and it just gets straight to the point of explaining why Johnny is out for blood, and while I don't condone his actions in this film, as a horror fan, I completely understand where Johnny was coming from. Now, as a fan of Jason from the Friday the 13th franchise and the GOAT himself, I'm talking about the Shape, Michael Myers from Halloween, I always loved as a kid, and even watch him now, how intimidating these characters look, right? Especially when you see their battle scars from the years that they've been killing, from being submerged in water, being put on fire, being shot, being stabbed at, and those scars tell a story. And the same thing applies to our killer Johnny in this film. When you're seeing the perspective from behind his head, and even when the camera shows you other parts of his body, you know that Johnny has seen some stuff. He's been through some stuff. He's killed a lot of people in the past, which I like that element about a serial killer. And speaking of the kills, I will say this, if you guys have been following the marketing of this movie, there was an article that came out that talked about when people saw this, they couldn't finish watching it because it was so violent, and there was a kill in the film that made people throw up, which, listen, at this point in time, that's just a marketing strategy. I'm not saying that people weren't disturbed or bothered by seeing certain things, but the whole throwing up while watching it is just nonsense to me, because why would you market that? Would you buy a ticket of a movie if it said that people threw up while watching it? Like, I don't want to be in a theater with people throwing it up. So putting that aside and talking about the actual kills in this film, I will say it has a really high body count, and when it comes to the kills, they're pretty brutal, they're pretty violent, and I kid you not, I'm not marketing this movie. I'm being honest with you all. I don't want to speak hyperbole. As someone that's grown up in the watching all types of horror films and being a lover of slasher movies, there's a kill in this movie that is a Hall of Fame. It is one of my favorite kills I've seen in a very, very long time. And I'll just say, and when you see the film, you know what I'm talking about. It involves a yoga mat. I'll just say that. The scene is brutal. The scene is crazy. And I am really interested to talk to my horror fans in the comments. What did you all think about that kill? Is it one of the best kills you've ever seen? Let me know in the comments below. Now, last points I want to mention, as I said earlier, I like how the film laid out the exposition of the killer's backstory. And yes, it definitely has some connective similarities to Jason, but I also feel like it was paying homage to those type of movies. And I also like how the film plays with tropes that we've seen a million times, whether it is the silly characters making silly decisions. But speaking to the point of view of following the killer for most of the film, I found it at some points to be unique. I like how it does feel like if you were playing that video game that they made about Friday the 13th as you were playing as Jason, stalking his victims, it created a sense of uneasiness. You felt uncomfortable. I like how the film uses the sounds of him walking through the woods were very effective, but also, as I'll discuss later, there's a particular portion of this film that I thought did a fantastic job of capturing the sense of dread and tension and not knowing where the killer was. And I just wish that it had a feeling that I just described throughout the entire film, which actually brings me into my criticisms. Now, the attempt to create something new and changing the perspective, I really appreciate it, but I thought the execution was flawed. Listen, tropes are inherent in every single genre, and horror isn't immune to it, right? As a fan of horror, we can all attest that there are stereotypical stories that we've seen 1,000 times. There's the jump scares we come to expect, and more times than not, the dialogue isn't that great, and the acting isn't all that great. Now, that being said, I can forgive those things not being the greatest, but it doesn't mean I can ignore them. So there are some issues that I have with those things I just mentioned in this film, but getting past that and talking more about my real issues that I have with this movie, there's a point, and this may vary for everyone that's watching, but I found some of it felt boring because of the pacing. Now, yes, it's intentionally meant to be a slow burn, or as it's categorized as slow cinema, but I just wish that the shots when we're following the killers had more dynamic stuff going on. I sometimes wish that the location was different. Now, while it is scary to be in the unknown darkness and the vastness of the woods at points, but at times it just felt like it was repetitive and we were just watching the killer walk and walk and walk. And again, it just became a little bit of a slog fest, and it really affected the pacing for me while watching this. But my biggest issue I had while watching this movie was the lack of tension throughout long points of this film, the lack of suspense, because we are following the killer for 90% of the film. And to me, that stripped away all of that tension. That stripped away the sense of unknown, because we know exactly where the killer is. The only time you feel that sense of dread or fear of tension is the last 10 minutes of the movie, which were great, but most of the film, I just wish that we would have had more time of creating that sense of the unknown, creating that sense of tension, because again, when you're following the killer, you know what's going to happen. So that was kind of a catch-22 for me while watching this. But going back to talking about the last 10 minutes without spoiling anything, I will say the film does switch to POV for a bit, and while we're following this character, the POV switch did entirely work for me because there's zero connection or care for that particular character, and we also get this super long, drawn out monologue that pretty much expresses and explains the nature of the killer, and to me it kind of felt unnecessary, and if I'm being honest, it was kind of pretentious. So a lot to appreciate as a horror fan from this kind of different perspective, and there's some great kills in this film, and there's a experience to be had, but ultimately it didn't all work for me. But before I wrap this up and give you all my final thoughts on my score, I want to take this time to thank you all for making it to this point in the review. If you enjoyed yourself, make sure to do me a favor and hit that thumbs up, share this video, but also share your thoughts in the comments, and more importantly, consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Overall, I'm convinced that those who enjoy horror and slashers, including myself, will appreciate what In a Violent Nature was trying to accomplish. There's no denying how great some of these kills are, especially a certain yoga scene, and there's great use of sound design and immersive cinematography, but unfortunately, I was left mostly unsatisfied by the end of the film. The pacing is very slow and the scenes felt repetitive, and since we're seeing things from the POV of the killer, we know exactly where he's gonna be for 90% of the film, and again, it completely strips away any sense of tension or suspense. Now, while the premise is intriguing, the uncommon shift of perspective hindered the experimental slasher from reaching its full potential for me, but in my eyes, I still think it's worth checking out, but I think it's worth checking out on streaming. I'm gonna give this film a solid 3 out of 5. So at the time of this recording, the movie will be available in theaters on May 31st and will be available to stream on Shudder sometime later this year. So I'm not going to tell y'all how to spend your money, but I would say it may not be go rush out to the theater to see it in theaters, but definitely check it out on streaming. And when you do, let me know what you all thought, your pros, your cons, your favorite kill. I think it's going to be pretty obvious that the yoga kill is pretty spectacular, but let me know what you thought about the kills. What did you think about the perspective of the killer? Do you want to see more films doing that? Would you want to see a sequel to this film? Because there is an opportunity to continue this, again, from a different perspective, different locations. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you again for watching today's review. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.